Hello, my name is Dr Ursula Hackett and I'm an academic based at Royal Holloway, University of London. I've created these videos for ambitious students who want to write brilliantly, not just okay. This video is the first of 3 about examining the assumptions underlying a question. All advice about how to write essays tells you to read the question. But what does read the question really mean? Skimming isn't enough. You need to take your time, define the key concepts, think about how they relate to one another, and root out any assumptions the question is making. Read the question means read the question critically, that is, actively evaluate it and come to a judgment about it. I'm going to give you some techniques to help you to read the question critically. One way to read the question critically is to consider whether the question contains any underlying assumptions, propositions that are accepted without proof, hidden in the background, and may not be immediately obvious to the casual reader. Exposing these assumptions and examining them explicitly can help turn a so-so essay into a brilliant one. It starts with something called implicature. Implicature is a proposition that is implied by a statement, but not stated explicitly. Don't be disturbed by the fancy word. Implicature is all around us in everyday speech. There's a surface statement, just whatever you're saying. I'm talking to camera, you're watching a video. But often there's something underlying the surface statement. We experience implicature in everyday life. For instance, if I ask you, is Tom still living in London? The word still indicates an implicature. The question is based on assumption that Tom used to live in London, even if he doesn't now. If I just asked you, is Tom living in London? Then there'd be no assumption about whether or not Tom has ever lived in London before. Here's another example. Laura is also a vegetarian. Have you spotted the word that indicates an implicature? That's right, also. There's a statement I'm making on the surface, that Laura is a vegetarian, but there's another statement lurking beneath it, something that's implied by the word also. Somebody else, probably someone we know, is a vegetarian too. These assumptions may or may not be true. If I come up to you while you're loading your plate with tofu and ask, is your sister a vegetarian too? Then, in addition to asking you a question about your sister, I have probably also implied that you are a vegetarian. Perhaps you're not. Perhaps you're a carnivore who just happens to like coagulated soy milk. Although we don't often think about it explicitly, everyday speech is riddled with implicature. For instance, if I say, the problem with the cat is that it doesn't know how to use the cat flap, then my use of the definite article the implies that there is just one problem and one cat and one cat flap. If we had several cats, I would most likely have identified it by name, Felix, or description, our fattest cat. These implicatures come up in essay questions, so paying close attention to the wording of the question can help you to answer the question critically. For instance, you might be asked, do presidential election debates still matter? Remember the still implicature in, is Tom still living in London? This question implies that presidential election debates used to matter, and it's asking you whether or not they do now. That's an assumption, and you might want to question it. You might think, hang on, maybe election debates have never really mattered for a given time period and for a given understanding of matter. Or perhaps you think that the assumption is indeed true, but you need to bring it into the light explicitly. It's like 2 separate questions. Did debates matter now? And did they matter in the past? Weaker answers would ignore the assumption and simply start listing the ways in which presidential election debates currently matter. Instead of leaping ahead with the answer in the present day, drag that assumption out of its hiding place and address it. Have a think about the assumptions underlying the following questions. Is the third world still a useful concept? Is the ideal of a democratic transnational public sphere realistic nowadays? Is Freud's personality theory still relevant? Or remember our assumption indicated by the words like to or also. In his theory of simulacra, does Lucretius address non-visual senses too? T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets poem can also be seen as a criticism of classicising conventions, Discuss. These questions ask about non-visual senses and criticism of classicizing conventions, but they also assume that Lucretius addresses visual senses in his theory of simulacra, and that the four quartets poem has more than one function, i.e. functions other than criticism of classicizing conventions. You will want to consider whether those assumptions are warranted. Sometimes questions that use the definite article the are making an unwarranted assumption that there's only one thing of the kind mentioned. Remember Felix the fattest cat? Consider, the problem with the ontological argument is that existence is not a predicate. Discuss. The problem with Marxist theory is its lack of internal consistency. Discuss. A weaker answer might simply list the inconsistencies in Marxist theory or explain Kant's criticisms of the ontological argument. A stronger answer would consider the assumption underpinned by the word the, that there is only one problem with the ontological argument or with Marxist theory. Many scholars would take issue with those assumptions. One way to start a really top-notch essay is to have a good think about any hidden assumptions or ambiguities in the question before you start. Why does it help? Because it forces you to slow down and really think about what the question's asking. And it also allows you to practice your critical thinking skills, the essence of a brilliant essay, because you're not just taking those assumptions as given, you're actively evaluating them. Are they true or false? Thanks for watching this video. If you found it useful, please like the video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where you can find other videos to help you write truly brilliant essays.